In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural checkered kitchen marble floor material in Blender. And to see how this checkered marble floor material looks in a kitchen scene, I added it into this kitchen scene here, which I created. And I do think it looks really nice in this kitchen scene. And the 3D models and 3D assets that I used to create this kitchen scene are from my recently released product, my Furniture and Home Asset Pack for Blender. If you'd like to check out that model pack, I'll have the links in the description. So here is the procedural material, and I am going to be using Cycles Render for this material because I am going for realism, but this material actually works really well in Blender Eevee. You can see here's the material in Blender Eevee and it pretty much looks exactly the same, and there isn't any lag in the viewport and it looks quite nice. So you could do this in Cycles or Eevee, it'll work great in both. So then after we create the procedural material, I'll show you how to join it together into this custom node group. So we have the overall scale of the material, and then we just have the marble scale, then we have the marble detail 1, and then we also have this marble detail 2 value. And then we also have the marble distortion. Then we also have the checker color 1, so this will change the color of the white checkers. Then we also have marble color 1, and this will change the color of the marble in the white checkers. And then we have the same thing, so checker color 2, this is the color of the dark checkers, and then marble color 2, and this is the color of the marble in the black checkers. Then we have just the checkers scale, and then we also have the roughness of the material. Then we also do have a bump strength if you want to add some bump. And then finally we have the checker rotation. So I have it set to 45 on default, but you could turn it to 0 if you don't want there to be any rotation. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase this material, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I'll have the links in the description. And if you like using procedural materials in your projects, then another great way to help support me and this channel is by checking out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. And my Ultimate Procedural Material Pack comes with all of my procedural materials, and they're all pre-set up in Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And you'll also get future updates with more procedural materials as I create them. You can also check out my procedural material packs, and those are packs of 10 materials. And you can also get each one of my materials individually on my Gumroad and Patreon. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, then definitely check out my procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So real quick, I'll go over my scene setup if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have, or you can use the timestamps in the description to jump straight to the material. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go to Mesh and add a plane, and I'll scale the plane down by 0.2. Then I can use Control A to just apply the scale, so this is the object's new default size. Then I can also rotate the plane. I'll rotate it on the x-axis by 90 and then hit enter, just so that it's rotated over so we get some nice reflections. Then I also added a camera in the scene, so if you press Shift A, you can add a camera, and I just pointed the camera at this plane. And if you select the camera and then go over here to the object data properties, I turned the focal length up to 80 just so that the camera is zoomed in a bit. And also if you want to make the camera a square image, if you go to the output properties, you can set the resolution X and Y to the same amount. Now for the lighting over here on the world properties, I added in this Artist Workshop HDRI. So this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. Link will be in the description if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K HDR version. So when you download the HDRI, you can add a new world, and you can click on the yellow dot next to color, and you can choose environment texture, and then you can just open up the HDRI. And then if I hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view, it'll give us some nice lighting. Now I did want to have some nice reflections reflecting off of this material, so I also pressed Shift A, I went here to light and added an area light. And then if you select the area light and go over here to the object data properties, I turn the shape to rectangle, and I changed the X size and the Y size so that we have this nice little beam of light. And I just pointed it kind of on the side here on the plane. And then I turn the power to 5, and I turn the color to a subtle blue color, and this will give a nice reflection on the floor. And then if you don't want to be able to see the HDRI in the background, then you can click here on the render properties, and you can open up the film tab, and you can just check mark the transparent button, and that way you won't be able to see the HDRI in the background. And then also to make the colors a bit nicer, I'll go here to the color management, and I'm going to use the view transform of filmic, and I'll set the look to high contrast, so that'll pop out the colors and make everything more contrasty and saturated. So I am in the shading workspace, so I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I am in the rendered mode, and then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'm just going to select the plane object, and then let me make this smaller so I have more space, and then I'll click here on new to add a new material. And I'm going to rename this material to Checkered Kitchen Marble Floor. And then before we create the material, I will be using the Node Wrangler add-on to preview the different nodes. So to enable the Node Wrangler, you can go to Edit and go to Preferences, and then go over there to the Add-ons tab and search for Node Wrangler, and you can checkmark the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So we're going to start off by creating the marble texture. So here in the shader editor, I'll press Shift A, I'm going to go to the search, and I'll search for a noise texture. Let's drop this down here, and then if you Control Shift and select different nodes, that is going to preview the node on the object, and that's using the feature of the Node Wrangler by Control Shift and selecting the nodes. Now with the noise texture selected, I'm also going to press Control T to add the texture coordinate and mapping, and this will tell the noise texture how it's going to be placed on the object. And I want to use the object coordinates, so let's put the object into the vector, and then this mapping here can be used to change the entire size of the material. So now let's change the noise texture settings. So I'll turn the scale up to like a 20, and then I want it to be very detailed, so let's turn the detail all the way up to the max. And then I do want a bit more roughness because that'll add a bit more detail, so I'll turn the roughness to a 0.55. And then I will turn the distortion a little bit up to like a 0.3. Now that kind of does look a bit simple, and I do want to add much more detail and make it look a bit more like marble. So I'm going to take the noise texture and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm going to stick this other noise texture in between the mapping and this noise. And so because this noise texture is in between the mapping and the noise, it's going to distort the placement of this noise texture. And then this noise texture here that we just added, I do want to change some of the settings. So I want to turn the scale down a bit, so I'll turn the scale to 8, but then I do want it to be very detailed, so I'll leave the detail at 15, and I'll leave the roughness at 0.55. But then I don't want any distortion, so I'll turn the distortion to 0. But now you can see we have a much more interesting marble texture. Now I want to make this marble texture look much more contrasty, so I'll bring the principled shader down, and I'll press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'll search for a color ramp, and let's put the color ramp after this noise texture. And then I can drag around these tabs, and that is going to make it more contrasty. So I'm going to drag the black tab to kind of about here, and then also the white tab to about there. So now we have a nice marble texture. Now when we create the custom node group, I want to be able to control the colors. So I'll press Shift A, I'm going to go here to color, and I'm going to add the mix color node. And we're going to drop this here after the color ramp. Now on the mix node, the factor is determining where it's going to be color A and where it's going to be color B. So I want to take this color ramp here and I'll put the color into the factor. So I'll Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So here on color A, I'll just make this fully black, and then here on color B, I'm going to make this fully white. So if I Control Shift and select between the color ramp and the mix, you can see it actually doesn't look any different, but now we have these custom colors and we can plug this into the custom node group. And so this will give us the option to control the custom colors. So this node setup here is the light marble texture, but I also want to make a dark marble texture, which we're going to put in the dark checkers. So I'm going to click and drag to box select the noise, the color ramp, and the mix, and I'll bring these up here. But we're not going to select this other noise, just one noise, the color ramp, and the mix. And I'm going to press Control Shift D. That'll duplicate the nodes, but it'll keep the wires plugged up. And so I'm going to put these duplicated nodes underneath the top ones, and I'll Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So we can now change some of the settings to make it look like dark marble. So on this bottom noise texture, I'm going to turn the scale to 15, and then I'll also leave the detail at 15 and the roughness to 0.55. But then this distortion, I want it to be more distorted, so I'll turn the distortion to 1. And then I want to make this a dark marble instead of a light marble, so I can drag the color ramp around, and I want to drag the black tab much farther over, so there's going to be more black area, and so now it is much much darker. So I'll drag the black tab to about here, and then the white tab I can kind of drag to about there. So now we have some dark marble and it just has some little white areas. And then this mix node is controlling the light and dark values, so we can use this later in the custom node group. So I can now Control Shift and select the two mix nodes, and you can see we have light marble and dark marble. So I now want to create the checker texture and then we'll mix them together. So I'm going to click and drag and select these nodes, and then I can just drag them over so I have a bit more space. So I'll now press Shift A, I'll go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the checker texture. And let's just drop this down here, and I can Control Shift and select the checker texture to preview it. Now I do want to turn the scale up, so I'm going to turn the scale to a 12. But then I also want to use the object coordinates, and I also want to plug it into this mapping, because this mapping will change the entire size of the material because it's plugged up to all the textures. So let's take the mapping vector, and we're going to plug this into the vector of the checker texture. Now I want to rotate the checker texture around. So what I'm going to do is select this mapping node, and I'll press Shift to duplicate it, and I'm going to drop it here before the checker texture. And I can just drag the mapping here underneath this noise. So this mapping is going into the second mapping, and then this mapping is going into the checker texture. So I now just want to rotate the texture, so we can take the mapping rotation Z value, and we can just turn this around. And I'm going to type in 45, so now that looks like a checkered kitchen floor. So now here on color 1, I want to add in the light marble, and then here on color 2, I want to add the dark marble. So on this top mix, I'll put the result into color 1, and then this bottom mix, I'll put the result into color 2. So now you can see we have the light marble and the dark marble. So I can now take the checker texture color, and we're going to put that into the base color of the principled shader, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview the material, and I'll drag the checker texture up here. Now I want to turn the roughness down to make it more shiny, so let's turn the roughness down, but instead of just turning the roughness down, I actually want to add a noise texture into the roughness so that there's a bit of variation, so some parts are a bit more rough and other parts are a bit more shiny. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and let's just drop the noise texture right here. And then again, I want this mapping to control the entire size of the material, so let's take the vector, and I can put that into the vector of this noise texture. And then I can Control Shift and select this noise texture to preview it. So let's now change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to 10, and then let's turn the detail all the way up so it's very detailed. And I do want to add a lot of roughness, so I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.7 so it's even more detailed. So now this factor value can go into the roughness value. So the light and dark values are going to control where it'll be more rough and where it'll be more shiny. And I'll Control Shift and select the principled shader. Now it's not very contrasty, and I want to be able to control the roughness better. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's put the color ramp after this noise texture, but before the roughness. So I can now drag these tabs around, and that is going to make it more contrasty. So if there is more black values, then it's going to be more shiny, but if there's more white values, it's going to be more rough. So I'll drag the black tab to about here, and then this white tab I'll drag kind of to about here. But I do want the entire thing to be more shiny, so I want to just make the entire thing darker. So I'll click on the white tab here, and I'm just going to make this kind of like a mid-gray color. And if you want to use the exact same gray color that I'm using, then you can go over here to the hex value, and you can punch in A8, A8, A8. So now if I just kind of look around here on the material, look at the reflections, you can see it is a bit shiny. Now later on when we create the custom node group, I want to be able to control the roughness. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the hue saturation value, and let's put this in between the roughness and the color ramp. We have this value right here, and so if I drag this up and down, it's going to make it lighter or darker, and so that is going to control the roughness. So we can use this later in the custom node group. And then the last thing that I want to do is to add just a tiny little bit of bump just to make a very subtle bump on the surface. So let's take the noise texture factor, and I can put that into the normal, but then we need to convert this to proper normal data. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for a bump node, and let's put the bump node in between the noise texture and the principled shader. And then to convert the noise texture black and white data into normal data, we actually want to put the noise texture factor into the height value. So now you can see it looks very bumpy. However, this is way too bumpy, and I want the bump to be very, very subtle because the marble surface should be pretty smooth. So on the bump strength, I'm going to turn this to a 0.005. And that way it will be very, very subtle, but kind of in the reflections, you can see just a little bit of subtle bump. And there we have it. So there is the finished procedural material. So I'm now going to show you how to join it together into a custom node group. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all the nodes except the material output. And then you can use Control G, and that is going to join it together into a node group. And I'm going to click up here and then press Control C to copy the name of the material. And if you press the Tab key, that'll go in and out of the node group. So I'll drag the node group over here to the material output and I'll zoom in, and I'm also going to click here to make it bigger. And if I click here on the node group name, I can now press Control V just to paste the name. So with the node group selected, I'll hit the Tab key to go into the node group, and then I'll press the N key to open up this side panel, and I'm going to click right over here on the group tab. And you can see there are inputs and outputs. Now here on the outputs, I want to double click on this to rename it, and I'm going to rename the output to shader, because now outside of the node group you can see it's just called shader, and I do like that a bit better. So I will go back into the node group, and if I go right over here you can see there is this group input, and we can plug values up into the group input to control them outside of the node group. So I'll just drag the group input down here, and I first want to take this scale from the mapping and let's put that into the group input. Now outside of the node group this is split up into 3 values, but I just want it to be 1 value. So if you hit the Tab key to go back into the node group, you can click here on the scale input, and to make this 1 single value we can change the type here from vector to float. And then I want to turn the default value back to 1, and then I need to go outside of the node group. I need to turn the scale back to 1, and then I can hit the Tab key to go back into the node group. So I now want to be able to control the marble scale, so I'll drag the group input right up here, and we can take this noise texture scale, let's put that into the group input, and then I can click on this to rename it, and I'm going to rename this to marble scale. So then outside of the node group you can see we have this marble scale, and that'll just change the size of the marble. So let's go back into the node group, and I also want to add 2 detail levels for the marble, so I'm going to use this detail here and also this roughness here. So I'll put the detail into the extra socket, and also this roughness I'll put that into the extra socket, and then right here on the side panel I can click on these to rename them, and I'm going to rename the first one to marble detail 1, and then I will click here on the name. I'll use Control C to copy the name and click here on the roughness, and I'll paste that with Control V, and I want to rename this one instead to marble detail 2. So now we have 2 custom values to change the detail of the marble. And then I also want to control the distortion, so let's put the distortion here into the extra socket, and I can just rename this to marble distortion. And then I want to be able to control the custom colors, so I'll click on the group input, and I'm going to drag it right over here above the mix nodes. And I actually first want to take this mix here, I want to take color B, and I'm going to put that into the extra socket, and then I'm going to take color A on the top mix, and I'll put that into the extra socket. So then I can just click on these to rename this, and this white one here, this is going to be the checker color, so I'll call this one checker color 1. And then right here I'll click on this to rename this one, and I'm going to rename this one to marble color 1. And then I want to do that for the other mix node down here, so I'll take color A and I'll put that into the extra socket, and then color B, put that into the extra socket. So this first one here, this one was the black one, so I'm going to rename this one to checker color 2, and then this one here, this is going to be marble color 2. So then outside of the node group we have 4 different colors for both of the marbles and both of the checker colors. So let's go back into the node group. I also want to control the checker scale. So right here on the checker texture, we have the scale. So I'm going to drag out a wire here and I'll stick this into the extra socket. And then I can click on this to rename it, and I'll rename this to checker scale. And then I want to also be able to control the roughness and the bump strength. So I'll drag this group input right down here, and we can take this value from the hue saturation value. That's going to make it lighter or darker, so it'll control the roughness. So I'll put the value into the extra socket here, and then I can click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to roughness. And then I want to be able to control the bump strength, so I'll just take the strength here, put that to the extra socket, and then I can rename this to bump strength. And then finally, I want to be able to control the rotation of the checkers. So I'm going to drag the group input back here, and we can take this second mapping, we can take the rotation, and let's stick this into the extra socket. And then if I click here to rename this, I can rename this to checker rotation. All right, so I'll drag this back here, and I can tab to go out of the node group, and I'll press the N key to close the side panel. And real quick, just to preview the final material, I'll change the rendering engine over to Blender Eevee so that it is in real time. So we have the overall size of the material, material, then we just have the marble scale, then we have the marble detail and the second marble detail. And then we also have this marble distortion. Then we have checker color 1, and this is the light checker. Then we have marble color 1, and this is going to be the color in the light checkers. And then we also have checker color 2, and this is going to be the color of the black checkers. And then marble color 2 is going to be the marble texture in the black checkers. Then we have the checker scale, and then we also have the roughness of the material. We also have the bump strength if you want to make that more bumpy. And then finally, we have the checker roughness. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to purchase this material and also help support the channel, you can get this material on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, you can check out my procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. But I hope you found this helpful, and thanks for watching.